In the summer of 1994, the world was gripped by the rise of new technology, and for 14-year-old Tommy Marshall, there was nothing more exciting than the arcade. Nestled in the corner of the local mall, the arcade was Tommy's sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in flashing lights, digital beeps, and the thrill of high scores. But one game stood out that year, an experimental VR headset simply labelled Reality Shift. It was unlike anything Tommy had ever seen before. The bulky, futuristic device sat on a pedestal in the centre of the arcade, and a sign beside it read, "Experience reality like never before." Tommy was captivated. He saved up all his allowance, waiting for the day he could try it out. On a Saturday afternoon in July, he finally had enough quarters. Nervously, he handed them to the attendant, who raised an eyebrow but didn't say much. Strapping the headset on, Tommy immediately felt a strange sensation wash over him. The world around him dissolved, replaced by a hyper-realistic simulation. In this virtual world, everything seemed so vivid, so real. But the boundaries between the game and reality felt oddly blurred. The objective was simple: survive in a dystopian city overrun by hostile figures. The people in the simulation were faceless, their bodies pixelated, their movements jerky. Tommy moved through the streets, avoiding them, picking up weapons, and eliminating anything that came too close. Hours felt like minutes, and when the attendant tapped Tommy's shoulder to say his time was up, it jolted him as if waking from a dream. Dazed, Tommy removed the headset. Everything seemed off. The colours of the real world looked duller, the people less defined. Faces blurred together, and for a split second, Tommy swore he could still see the pixelated figures from the game. The feeling stuck with him long after he left the arcade. That night, Tommy barely slept. His dreams were filled with the game's endless streets, faceless figures, and the need to survive. The lines between the real world and the game had blurred, and when he woke up, everything around him still seemed wrong. Over the next few days, Tommy withdrew from his friends and family. He skipped school, preferring to stay in his room, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Everywhere he went, people didn't look like people anymore. They moved in strange, robotic ways, their faces distorted, just like in the game. It was as if the VR headset had never really come off. One evening, Tommy returned to the arcade, desperate to prove to himself that what he'd experienced wasn't real, that he was just imagining it. But when he walked in, everything clicked. The figures around him, the arcade goers, the attendant, none of them were human. They were just like the pixelated figures in the game, their forms jagged and unreal. He knew what he had to do. Just like in the game. Tommy grabbed a wrench from the maintenance cart near the entrance and began methodically moving through the arcade. He struck down everyone he encountered, his mind completely detached from the reality of what he was doing. To him, it was still the game. His heart raced, adrenaline coursing through him as he eliminated each target, one by one. They weren't people, they were just pixels, obstacles in the simulation that needed to be removed. He had to win. He had to survive. By the time the police arrived, the arcade was a scene of chaos and carnage. Tommy was sitting calmly in the middle of the room, covered in blood but showing no signs of remorse. When they questioned him, his response was chillingly detached. "I was still playing," he said, his voice eerily flat. It was like the VR headset was still on. The people weren't real. They were just pixels. "I didn't know I was hurting anyone. I was just playing." The authorities were baffled. They examined the VR headset, but there was no evidence that anything was wrong with it. To everyone else, it was just a game, a novelty experience that lasted a few minutes. But for Tommy, it had become something far more sinister. His perception of reality had fractured. A psychological evaluation was quickly ordered. Tommy showed no understanding of what he had done. He insisted that the world around him still didn't feel real, that he was trapped in the game, unable to escape. The court found him unfit to stand trial. Diagnosed with a severe dissociative disorder and psychosis, Tommy was committed to a high-security mental institution, where he remains to this day. Doctors have spent years trying to reach him, but Tommy's mind remains locked in the virtual world. He speaks rarely, but when he does, it's always about the game. The game never ends, he whispers to the staff. "I'm still playing. I have to finish. I have to survive. To this day, no one can say for certain what happened in that arcade. Was it a malfunction of the VR headset, or was it something deeper, a mental break triggered by immersion in the game? Some of the staff at the institution believe there's more to it, that perhaps the technology tampered with Tommy's perception in ways no one fully understands. But whatever the cause, the tragedy of that summer day in 1994 remains an unsettling reminder of how fragile the boundary between reality and illusion can be.